Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, I am joined by an extra special guest, someone who I have not had a chance to catch up with in so long. Canadian science fiction author, genius of science fiction, Robert J. Sawyer. Rob, it is so good to see you.
AP, it's wonderful to see you. We're friends in real life. We get to see each other frequently. Pre-pandemic at the International Conference for the Fantastic and the Arts in Orlando, Florida each year. I've missed seeing you and my other friends, of course, but congratulations on your marriage since I last saw you. May you both live long and prosper and have a better fate than we know that Spock and T'Pring are going to end up with.
Oh, you see, I'm already working in the theme.
That's right.
And the subject of what we're going to be talking about today. Well, thank you very much for saying that. But because you are a Trekker, you are a fan of Star Trek, the original series, you are conversant in Trek, your knowledge is well established. I thought you'd be great to talk to about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, because I've been having a blast watching Strange New Worlds. But also, maybe we can get on to talking about Trek in general or whatever aspects. But I wanted to talk to you about Strange New Worlds because I'm so excited about it.
So I love Strange New Worlds. First, it's quite clear to me that of all the post-original series Star Treks, it's had the strong, and we're only 6 episodes into it now, there's 6, the strongest first season of any of them. They launched out of the gate terrifically. Discovery, I think, stumbled pretty horribly in its first season. Enterprise, well, I'll come back to Enterprise in a second. And of course, Next Generation, I know you're a big TNG fan, but that first season was painful in my estimation. The second season was, less. It was like Stockholm Syndrome. You'd come to, okay, you had to watch the damn thing, and maybe you felt a little more positive about your captors. It wasn't until the third season, but then they had good seasons, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 good seasons, and one good movie out of 4 with the TNG cast being First Contact. This has been so strong out of the gate, but I alluded to Enterprise, and I want to say, the only blemish for me on Strange New Worlds is this is the show we should have gotten 20 years ago when they announced originally that they were making a prequel to TOS series. We all and the ship was going to be Enterprise, right? We all assumed then, way back then, that we were going to get Captain Pike #1 and the ship as it was prior to being handed over to James T. Kirk. And they didn't do that. They did a bait and switch on us and gave us this thing that never gelled. It's the only one to, we don't know how long Strange New Worlds is going to go, but the other series have all gone 7 years, right? And it was the only one that was truncated, and ironically, when it was finally starting to get good. But it was truncated because by the time it started to get good, there was no audience left. The audience attrition had been gigantic on Enterprise. Why it took so incredibly long to get around to giving us Strange New Worlds, which obviously the public had been clamoring for, astonishes me. And I've got to say, you mentioned I'm a big Star Trek fan. And I edited an essay collection with David Gerald called Boarding the Enterprise. And I also wrote the final 2 episodes of the fan film series Star Trek Continues. But I'm friends with Brannon Braga, who was famously the showrunner of many a Star Trek series, and also, of course, has the distinction of having written more Star Trek scripts than anyone else in history. Brannon and David Goyer wrote the pilot for the TV series Flashforward, based on my novel of the same name. And Brannon and Dave and I were all friends. But Brannon said that his biggest flaw as a Star Trek showrunner And it showed particularly, for instance, in Generations, the TNG TOS crossover movie, was he didn't have sufficient familiarity with or affection for the original series. And what they've done here with Strange New Worlds has given us a love letter to the original series, all the strengths that were in TOS. In particular, very interesting, the episodic format. Strange New Worlds, plural. Explore new life and new civilizations, plural. A story of the week with a moral message. And this is the other thing that I think is key in importance about Strange New Worlds that harks back quite directly to the original series, tonally different from episode to episode. I go and pitch TV shows all the time. I had one, Flashforward. I try to sell others. And producers always ask, well, what's the tone of the series? They want to hear that it's going to be dark like Mr. Robot or lightweight or whatever. But we've seen with Strange New Worlds that they've done deadly serious episodes. The most recent one, episode number 6, was, extremely dark and serious. Let's lift us up where suffering cannot reach. But Spock Amok, episode 5, was lightweight comedy. And I got to say, the best comedy probably that Star Trek has done, in my opinion, except for, and maybe even better than, The Trouble with Tribbles. Just lovely, because all of the comedy was organic to the characters. It wasn't contrived. It wasn't, anyway, twisting or shifting anything. Like, a lot of people, like my friend James Allen Gardner, great Hugo nominated science fiction writer who lives here in Canada, loves a piece of the action from the original series, which is the one where they go back, they go to a planet that's modeled on the Chicago mobs of the 1930s. Well, you really have to twist and turn to get Kirk and Spock into that storyline. There was none of that in Spock Amok. It was all organic to the story they were telling, the characters, and it just worked beautifully. So to me, that's probably the highlight of the 6 episodes we've had so far. And I have to say, sadly for me, the low light was number 6. And the reason is simply that number 6, which again is called Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach, was so blatantly, a person on my Facebook wall today used the word homage. And I said that was an extremely polite word for what they did, an homage to Ursula K. Le Guin's Hugo Award winning Those Who Walked Away from Omelas. So that bothered me as a writer. This is my latest novel, The Oppenheimer Alternative. As a writer, that rankled that they took something that belonged to somebody else and adapted it, yes, with a Star Trek veneer, but still it bothered me.
And I have to say, was it season 3 of Discovery was basically a lot of the major point of season 3 actually revolved around the same thing of the single alien who was going to be responsible for the burn, and it was all focused on that one thing and whether you should just kill them to stop it ever happening again.
Yes, but go ahead.
But for that, because they took it in a very different direction, the parallels to the Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas wasn't as stark. Whereas this episode, it did strike me that I would have expected a co-writing credit for how much of that episode was Le Guin. Or even bringing in N.K. Jemisin for her sort of update and rebuttal short story that she did, which is Those Who Stay and Fight.
Those Who Stay and Fight,
which again, we see this in writing of people being inspired by and in dialogue with previous works. But this wasn't in dialogue with Le Guin. This was, Le Guin had a great idea.
This was lip syncing to Le Guin. That's what it was. Yes. And it as somebody said to me, I'm on a Facebook group devoted to Strange New Worlds, and I mentioned it, and I mentioned it very politely, and the person replied with a "stop complaining" to me, to which my reply was, I'm going to get deleted and possibly banned for this, was NCC 1701, no bloody BITEM or E, right? Bite me. Because as a creative person, A, it rankles me, and B, you know, no, Ursula is dead. I had the privilege of knowing Ursula in life. She's dead. Okay, you couldn't get Ursula to write for the show. But one of the things that got lost after the original series was getting science fiction writers who were known in the print world to write for the series. We're all loving in Strange New Worlds what they're doing with T'Pring and Spock and their betrothal. Well, remember where that came from. That didn't come from Gene Roddenberry. That came from Theodore Sturgeon, who wrote Amok Time, the title Spock Amok of the most recent episode, the feature T'Pring, of course, that is an homage to Amok Time.
But could we then say, well, that particular the contrivance at the beginning of the two of them doing the body switch, and of course
Freaky
people go
Friday.
Freaky Friday,
right?
And it's, let's face it, Star Trek. All science fiction shows, I would have a lot of science fiction. I shouldn't say all. I shouldn't make massive generalizations like that. But a lot of science fiction shows, I think the writers remember or half remember, or they go, do you remember that thing? And that suddenly spurs the writing room and they try to come up with their own spin. I can imagine that kind of atmosphere, because we've seen, because of the episodic nature of Strange New Worlds, which I find so refreshing, because so many TV shows now are focused on that.
Right.
You're going to binge an entire season on download, on streaming on demand. Let's just do a whole season arc. It's refreshing for a show to go episodic for a change, but trying to come up with a novum for every single episode can be, I think, a challenge for a writer's room, because you're not faced with that. Well, what's the general arc we're going on this season? And we'll build on that.
Right. But they only needed 10 for this season, or it's a 10 episode season. I mean, I don't want to harp on it too strongly. And there are those who will rebut, quite rightly, that the original series was not without its sins in that area either. Everybody's top 10 list includes Balance of Terror, with the Romulans introduced, and that is very much an homage to the classic submarine film The Enemy Below, in not quite scene for scene, but very, very close. So for sure, this is done all the time in television. And if I get past that and we talk a bit about episode 6, for me and my wife, we were watching it together as we do. The first half kind of dragged, and I didn't need to see Pike and the old romance. I mean, it was okay. Very Kirk-esque, I have to say. But when it picked up and they started dealing with the question, the philosophical question, it became very interesting to me. And I was kind of on the edge of my seat about what they were going to do at the end. I wrote a novel. My penultimate novel is called Quantum Night. It's all about utilitarianism, utilitarian philosophy. And to give, it all its due, Ursula K. Le Guin was very much borrowing from utilitarian philosophy and from the musings of philosophers like Peter Singer, and of course, James, the founder of modern psychology. Because utilitarianism says the greatest good is maximizing the happiness of the largest number of people. So if you could get it so that everybody but one person was happy, the good needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, as Star Trek often phrases it, beginning with the Wrath of Khan. That actually is a utilitarian good. If only one person has to suffer, so everybody else is happy, that would be, by that logic, the right solution. And yet, I do think the great line at the beginning of this episode, by the way, is when Pike intervenes and says, not only do Federation regulations or Starfleet rules, but my conscience requires me to act. And that was the theme of the episode. To hell with the rules, even to hell with the utilitarian maxim. My conscience compels me to act in this case. And I think on a thematic basis, that episode number 6 did rise to a good level.
And it's a fascinating one because you can see the writer trick in it, which is and it's what Le Guin did. What is the most emotive, innocent that we can place this burden on? Because if we said, okay, here's a society of 100 million people, and these 10 degenerate criminals have to be in jail, everyone go, well, I don't really have a problem with that. And it's the writer setting up the rules very specifically. The cold equations, perfect example of a writer so careful to set out the rules so that you could only get to that answer.
Right, Tom Godwin, yes.
Tom Godwin's the cold equations. And I have to admit, because it was so heavily based on Le Guin, I had a smidge of disappointment that they didn't try to extend it further. That they took Le Guin and went, well, Le Guin did it best, let's go. And N.K. Jemisin put her own spin on it. She put it in a new context, in a new narrative form, asking a different question. And that episode, it got to the end and I went, you had an opportunity to recontextualize the question, but you didn't. I still love the episode. Well, it's Le Guin's story. Of course I was going to love it.
Yeah. Le Guin's Hugo award-winning story. We got to point this out very quickly. It's not an obscure story. It came out 49 years ago, almost half a century ago, won the Hugo Award for best short story of the year. It's not us saying, oh, here they might have missed it. They had to know. And if they didn't, Paramount's legal department had to have known what they were doing.
It has been anthologized something like, I don't know, like 15, 20 times.
Yeah, exactly.
It's on college courses. I've taught it because it's such a thought-provoking story. But I have to say, I've been fascinated by how they've constructed this TV show, because I think one of the advantages that Strange New Worlds has had is that Pike and Number One and Spock all were introduced and are now familiar to the audience, not from previous incarnations, but in Discovery.
Yeah.
And they got to establish those characters and get a sort of following for them before the show launched, which you have to admit, I think, is a significant advantage almost over any of the other shows. And because of that, I think there was a lot of goodwill extended towards it, because I'm really enjoying Anson Mount as Pike, and also they've put in a time limit on it. It cannot extend past a certain point in Trek history because of his incident.
That's right.
And so it's not going to go, oh, they're just going to keep spinning their wheels forever until people get bored. You go, no, there's a finite limit on this, and because it's not 1 week in time equals one episode.
Yes,
you go. They can go, a year has passed and nothing much has happened, except Pike is now getting more and more concerned about what's
and
going
higher and higher hair.
So those little tricks that they put in. But I think what sells it most for me is that each episode has tried to choose a different character to focalize the episode through. And it's introducing us to the members of the crew, letting us get to know the rest of the crew from someone's perspective, and none of it feels forced, none of it feels false. That it's a very natural way to explore story with these different character perspectives, and we feel we get to know everyone then.
Yes, I agree with you completely. In fact, episode 2, which was called Children of the Comet, is the one where Cadet Uhura comes to Pike's cabin for captain's dinner, and in that episode we learned more about Nyota Uhura, who never even had that first name, Nyota, in the original series, more about her as a character than in all 79 episodes of original Trek, plus the 6 original series movies, plus the 3 J.J. Abrams movies where she was played by Zoe Saldana. More about that character, and the character became well-rounded and fascinating and interesting. I mean, she was always iconic because, of course, she was an African-American, well, not American, forgive me, and as a Canadian, I shouldn't make that mistake. She was an African character who had a prominent role in an era in which that was vanishingly rare. The only, and she at least survived unscathed. The only other famous African-American character in a significant role on TV in the United States at the same time was Bill Cosby on I Spy. And he won, everybody remembers Cosby as a sex offender, number one. Number two, as a comedian. Number three, he won an Emmy for Best Actor in a Dramatic Series for I Spy. But he was the first African-American co-lead of a TV series. And that was the era that Star Trek was on. So very significant. Uhura emblematic in his representation. And we all know that Whoopi Goldberg said she was inspired and said to her mother, Mama, you got to come and see on TV. And she used a phrase we no longer use that was played at the time to describe the person that she was seeing on screen. We'd say person of color today. And she said, and she's not the maid, right? Yep. Which is hugely important. But in that episode, she became a human being with nuance and subtlety and character and all kinds of things. She's absolutely terrific. The most problematic of characters from the original series, who wasn't one of the big 7, was Nurse Chapel. She was in a bunch of episodes, but not a regular, and was a very problematic character, this whiny, love-struck character. And they've turned her into a spectacular character. Jess Bush playing Nurse Chapel. The retcon, or the new version of Chapel, is incredibly appealing. Heterosexuals, males find her, as I am, find her incredibly sexy, all kinds of things where they just have really up-res that character a great deal.
But it's making the characters rounded, giving them backstory, giving them characteristics beyond role or function. And I think that's one of the weaknesses sometimes of some shows, is they go, oh, you're going to sit there, you're going to be there every week, and occasionally you'll get one line according to your contract. But you're pilot. That it doesn't matter what name we give you, all you do is pilot.
Kayla Detmer on Discovery is that character. Yeah. For quite, she just sits there for most of the episodes. Yeah.
Whereas what we saw from the very beginning with Strange New Worlds is no, everyone on the ship who the audience is going to spend time with, we are going to make them all characters. We're going to give them depth. And I get the impression that as it goes on, they're going to keep expanding it. They're going to keep developing, because we see in each episode, I think they've been very careful to try and tie the themes of the episode to the character point of view that's exploring it. And you go, first of all, if more writers did that in TV, I think we would get much better TV. Your point of view character being tied and linked to the theme that you're exploring, and it's been very well chosen. So that is one thing. Then the actual narrative content of the episode, you can see how that is going to be specific to that character. So it's not just theme, but it's about having the character in a conflict that fits with who they are.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I have been really, really impressed by this. What's driving me nuts, I'll tell you right off the bat here, is if I look out that window right here in my apartment in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, the studio where they make Strange New Worlds is right there. It's even, the Discovery studio is several kilometers farther along. It's also made in Greater Toronto. And I haven't been able to visit yet because they had a complete, I got to visit the Discovery sets. I, a little bit of clout as an SF writer, but the Strange New World sets were completely locked down because of COVID. Nobody got in or out except for people who had to be there. So I'm hoping to get to see it. But
because otherwise, Rob, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
You heard it here. You heard it here first, folks, because in about 2 weeks' time, there'll be a banner headline in the newspaper. Prominent SF author caught sneaking onto set.
That's right. Well, you know, I mean, I have a little bit of cachet in Hollywood because Flashforward was a success in terms of critical reviews and so forth. And 2 years ago, my Hollywood agent at Gersh said to me, okay, come on down. Who do you want to have meetings with? And I said, there's only one guy I really want to meet with, Alex Kurtzman, who runs the Star Trek franchise. They're gearing up to do this show, Strange New Worlds. It is the show I was born to write for. And can you get me a meeting? He said, of course. You know, my agent get me a meeting with anybody, right? I've met with J.J. Abrams people. I had a meeting, I must say, with Marvel, where I said, you know, they said, oh, it's great for you to come in. I said, it's great for me to be here. What Marvel comic books you read? I don't read any of them. I know people would be killed to have this meeting with you guys right now. But yeah, my agent set it up. So here I am. Why don't we have a coffee? And that was very pleasant, but we obviously weren't going to do business. But I would have loved. And what drives me nuts as a Canadian, I have to say this, is there are Canadian actors on Strange New Worlds, Canadian production people, Canadian directors, Canadian grips, Canadian, stagehands, and it's made here in Canada with Canadian tax credit money. But the writer's room is in LA and they don't have a single Canadian writer, and that rankles me. And because of COVID, all meetings in LA were canceled and I never got to meet with Kurtzman. But I watched the show with great love. I just wish I had been able to become part of the team. It would have been my dream job.
And that's one of the things about TV writing. And like, obviously you have experience of this, because I remember Flashforward, great book, and then seeing the adaptation of it. When you have good quality writers and material to work with, what they can come up with is stunning, because adaptation is not a one-to-one. You can't just copy it onto the page and go, oh yeah, we're just going to copy the dialogue across. This is all fine.
Right.
There's a lot of work goes into it. But when you get that great writing and you get the energy in the writer's room, I think that then translates to giving the actors the foundation that they need for great performances.
Yes.
And everything then starts to come together, because then you have, people are inspired and you get a camaraderie, you get everything gelling. The CGI team, which is so often, quite far away and not connected.
Right.
They are inspired by the dailies that they're getting or the footage that they're getting to work with, and they want to build on it. The set designers who are coming in are seeing what they're doing and going, this is fantastic. And I think so much of that enthusiasm, the love and the care that has gone into this, we can see on the screen. We can see it right there in front of us. And so much of that, I think, starts with the writer's room.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I want to say about writer's room, because I was in the Flashforward writer's room, if you have a good writer's room, it raises the IQ of everybody in the room by 20 points, because you're just sparking off each other and you come up with things better than the individual would have come up with sitting alone, beating their head against the monitor, trying to come up with something. But yeah, the big problem with Star Trek, I think, until Strange New Worlds, and maybe we can make an exception for the 4th season of Enterprise on this, there was this mindset at CBS/Paramount that nobody who was a Trekkie should be allowed anywhere near Star Trek's writer's room. And it should all be written by people who would bring a new take to it. And, that was ridiculous, right? Now they have a writer's room packed with people who have deep knowledge of and affection for what has gone before in all the incarnations of Star Trek. And it just sparkles on screen. And this ridiculous, I don't know what they're doing over there where you are in Ireland, but over here we get Star Trek, actually Discovery on and Strange New Worlds broadcast television, not on Paramount Plus, which isn't in Canada yet. And they have a new overall branding that begins the beginning with Star Trek and Rainbow and everything, which is terrific. Finally, at Paramount, they've realized that Star Trek could have been and can become their powerhouse like the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the DC Universe. And it took them forever to realize that instead of thinking, okay, we got to make a Star Trek, but make it for people who aren't Trekkies, because they thought Trekkies or Trekkers were a vanishingly small demographic. Everybody is a Star Trek fan. Almost everybody who would be even remotely interested in watching a show set in space loves Star Trek. And so this sea change where they finally said, let's hire people who love and adore this material and make love letters for the fans. Fan service means servicing, in the case of Star Trek, a gigantic audience, not just a few diehard aficionados.
But it's interesting. I wouldn't say that just because these writers are fans is what makes them good. I think that's an element.
Yes.
But having someone who is a fan go, oh, well, we'll do this. And you go, well, yes, because they have to go down this corridor and turn left, because that's where that you go.
Right.
You need good writers who understand that if they turn left or right at the end of the corridor is not the main thing. It's why they're going down the corridor.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah.
But bringing that love of the subject matter in, I think, is important. Bringing in knowledge as well. And even if you want a new take on something,
yes,
having people there that have the institutional knowledge, that have the background knowledge, adds to that new take. That you get dialogue between different views, which, as you said, sparks new ideas.
Yes.
And one of the things that we mentioned, that this is a very episodic show, and the episode, which was essentially a submarine conflict.
Yes.
And I watched that, and I was struck by some elements of it that reminded me very much of Wrath of Khan, where they're hunting each other in that cloud. But more a lot of the submarine films that I'd seen before, that it turned Star Trek, which had become very much about these giant ships flying around very quickly and shooting lots of lasers, and added tension. It went, no, this is space. This is space battle, and we're going to make it tense. And all of those close-ups of the actors as they're staring intently at what is happening, and they built on all of the techniques that they use for the submarine war movies.
Yes.
And I thought it was an excellent episode. But
yes, that's number 4, Memento Mori. Exactly. They're pursuing a Gorn ship. And yeah, absolutely. That was a terrific episode. And I'm very interested. Of course, I love the Gorn. I'm a big dinosaur fan. And I'll be very interested to see if we actually get to see what they do with Gorn. And I hope they do a Gorn that's reminiscent of the Gorn in the original series, because one of the things, in Enterprise, they did Through a Mirror Darkly, they did the episode in the Mirror Universe. And we had a Gorn that was utterly unlike the Gorn in the original series. And that was so jarring to me. I don't mind that they've, revamping and updating and making things more visually busy and interesting than they were in the original series. But, I when they say, let's completely remake something, it doesn't work for me. When they do something where I can see, for instance, you see at Spock's station on the bridge on Strange New Worlds, he's got the spinning moire pattern and he's got the hooded viewer, right? And they go, yeah, that's Spock's station. Now all the details are different, but somebody understands that, where it came from. A respect for the originating material is evident, not just in the script writing, but also in the graphic and set design that's throughout the show.
And even in the episode where the Children of the Comet, where you see Spock and he's flying the shuttle, and you go, it's the big chrome, very like a 60s aesthetic, but with using, modern techniques and modern materials to go, no, we're going to make it look.
That's right. And he had the spherical viewer right next to him that they had in the Galileo interior set. Yeah, touches that you go, but I got to say, there are people who are discovering Star Trek for the first time with this show, as there have been with every series. Mm-hmm. And they're not being shortchanged. It works on its own basis, right? You don't, all of this adds a layer to it, but the series would be a failure if it simply was callbacks to things that have been done before. It has been a really first-rate science fiction series, and such a breath of fresh air after so much dystopian science fiction to have a truly optimistic show with a truly upbeat, positive main character.
And
even just though he's facing tragedy down the road, he still, as he says to number one, I love this job, which he does. It's apparent that Pike loves being captain and Anson Mount loves being Pike. It just pours out of the screen at you.
And even like the other characters, you can see, why do they want to go into space? Why are they on this ship? And it's because they want to be explorers. Like, that enthusiasm to find out what's out there is infectious. And again, the episodic format, and I keep going back to points, but it allows for, heaven forfend, there be a bum episode. Yeah. But you go, it statistically, it's likely to happen at some point. And, you know, I don't want it to, and they've shown no indication that one is coming. But if it happens, you go, okay, so there was a dud episode. But it's not going to cripple the season. It's not going to, oh, well, now the season's not going to work because all of this fell apart. And yet, the episodic narrative is refreshing because so few big shows do that now. The optimism is refreshing because we've been so focused on conflict and dystopia and action heavy, where action is conflated with conflict and lots of explosions.
Yes. Well, oh, go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
But it's, while this is new and refreshing, I think that adds a layer. But as you were saying, if you didn't have the foundation of each episode being a good story, of it being well acted, well delivered, looking good, sounding good, if it wasn't built on a foundation of a strong narrative, none of those things would mean anything, because you need the story foundation there first. And the fan service, the attention to detail, all of these keep adding additional reasons why it's enjoyable. But it has to come from a base of a good story. And I think they have nailed that for every episode this far.
I agree with you. And, you know, you mentioned, God forfend, that they might have a clunker at some point. I find it intriguing that the two, we've just watched episode 6, you and I, yesterday, just premiered yesterday as we record this, that episode 5 arguably is a remake of one of the most reviled original series episodes, Turnabout Intruder, where Kirk and Janice Lester, a man and a woman, switch bodies. And episode 6, last night's episode, Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach, is arguably a remake of Spock's Brain, a civilization that requires a human or a biological brain to be hooked up to run the machinery that runs their civilization. And that one is universally regarded as one of the worst episodes of the series. And yet they both had interesting ideas in the original series, and people argue quite vociferously that they were botched executions. And this time they took the same two seeds. Well, what could we do with Turnabout Intruder that would make it, you know, one of the great episodes? What could we do with Spock's Brain that would make it one of the great episodes? And I think rather than going, say, how can we do our City on the Edge of Forever or our Devil in the Dark, right? Do, you know, the ones that people love the most. They said, let's take the ones that didn't work the first time around and give them the proper treatment they should have had 55 years ago.
And that, like, bringing back the Gorn, when what, no, you know, I do not have the affection for the original series that you do.
Yes.
But I have to admit, when I see that picture of Kirk fighting the guy in the suit,
yes,
it isn't screaming, this is amazing television to me. But I always try to remind myself, this was 60 years ago. To expect the production quality that I have grown to expect in my lifetime is not fair when you're watching a show from that long ago.
Okay.
And
You would normally want dead air in a production. I'm going to walk off for 5 seconds. You hang on 5 seconds here. Because this is worth seeing.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I love talking to Rob.
This is my Gorn. This is how much I love the Gorn. This was cast from the original. You mentioned the actor was Gary Coombs, actually, who was in it. But this was cast from the original Gorn head with Swarovski crystals in the eye there. And he sits and watches me while I work and makes sure I work properly every day.
So that's what your editor looks like.
That's my editor. My editor is a Gorn. So you can't go wrong with a giant Gorn head. But I love the Gorn, and I know what you mean. It's a guy, the bodysuit was a wetsuit spray painted green. And yes, at the time, it was state of the art, but the art has changed a lot. I give you that. You know, I'm also a huge fan. Here's Dr. Zaya, so also keeps me company all the time, right? Of the original Planet of the Apes. And there are those who would say that the latex makeup masks, appliances are not all that convincing compared to what Andy Serkis does as a CGI character in the current versions with the Weta Workshop doing the effects. Maybe so. But it all comes back to both Arena, which, by the way, was adapted from a Frederick Brown story that they gave credit to and paid money to, unlike our most recent next Strange New Worlds. But what they had there was a great story. And that, as you said, it comes right back to it. It's the great narrative. Okay, it's a guy in a rubber suit, but it's a great story. And it has one of those great Roddenberry-esque endings. No, I won't kill him. And the Metron saying, you demonstrate the advanced trait of mercy, something we hardly expected. Very important. And in the height of the Vietnam conflict, a message that Americans need to hear, that just because they're your enemy and just because maybe they're in a territory you don't want them to be in doesn't give you the right to kill them.
But one of the things that I like about the re-inclusion of the Gorn is the Gorn have not been a huge part of development of any of the other Treks. We've had we've almost had the Borg done to death. We've had AIs done to death. We've had the Klingons done to death. We've had the Romulans done to death. And it's, who haven't we had yet? Oh, the Gorn. And I went, I actually hadn't even considered the Gorn. And seeing that in the episode, first of all, the reference that Noonien Singh makes and her backstory involving them, you go, that's really intriguing. I hadn't thought about early Gorn history. And then bringing it in as a focus of an episode, I was like, oh, this is great. And I think they did a very smart thing, which was they didn't show lots of the Gorn.
Yeah.
Little glimpses, what they sounded like, the evocation, the danger in the dark, which, classic horror writers are so well aware of when they're trying to put it on screen. Don't show the monster until you have built it up in the audience's brain, and try to only show glimpses of it, because what an audience imagines is going to be so much better than anything that you can put on the screen. And they did that with the Gorn. So I hope it gets explored a bit more.
Yes.
I genuinely would prefer for it not suddenly to become, oh, we're now going to have talks with the Gorn, because I think they need to remain somewhat mysterious and threatening and unknowable. Yes. And I think that gives them that predatory nature. The more that we know about them, the less predatory they become.
Right, exactly. And you're exactly right. I want to see the Gorn because I just love the physical Gorn. But from a storytelling point of view, you're exactly correct. You're exactly correct. And you're totally right. I actually, I was kind of more pleased with the second season of Picard than I was with the first. And I thought that the actress they brought in to play the Borg Queen did a terrific job. But the moment they introduced, and it was in First Contact, that they introduced the idea of a Borg Queen, to me, as a science fiction writer, fascinating to have a collective intelligence that has no centralized focus or distinct individual personality. And then they made it have exactly that. And it became, okay, so it's no different than Gru and his minions in, Despicable Me. It's a evil mastermind who's got a lot of little minions. That's what the Borg became after that. It was a failure to live up to the promise of the science fictional concept that they had, kind of introduced with the Borg. And so I'm done with the Borg for sure. We've had absolutely enough Borg and enough Klingons to last several lifetimes at this point. So yeah, I think they've got to develop something more interesting if they're going to have an ongoing threat, a more interesting ongoing threat.
And certainly, I think the seeds of an interesting ongoing threat in Strange New Worlds have already, if I could hazard a theory, the seeds have been shown where we've seen a lot of focus on AI and technology as the threat. Like, how many millions of science fiction stories have we seen where it's, oh, the advanced AI has gone mad and is trying to kill humanity. Oh, look, the technology is trying to kill us. Yeah, it's been done. And Star Trek has certainly leaned into that. The Borg being a semi variant of that, but
and a whole season of Discovery, the sphere data and whatever they called the anomaly control. That's right. Yeah.
But with Noonien Singh having that lineage about genetic engineering, in the very first episode, Nurse Chapel dabbling, and I have to admit, I was expecting someone to raise an eyebrow with the fact she said, I'm just going to edit your genes. And you go, hang on a sec. Isn't that something that the Federation goes,
yeah,
I'm just going to edit your genes? And you're like, well, I thought there was a bit of a problem with that. And so they keep bringing this up. And then obviously the reveal about number one, about Una's backstory, about being from a species that is all about genetic engineering. You go, are they setting the threat now to explore the biological more as a concept rather than the technological? And I just think it's been interesting. There's been a couple of references and episodes now that have brought up this biological aspect, far more so than technological.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's also very much in episode 6, right? Because the aliens there have this technology to go right in and adjust your protein structure at the quantum nanotechnological level. So that's an interesting, it hadn't occurred to me, but you're absolutely right. And it's certainly, we're definitely right on the threshold of doing genetic modification of human beings, even after they're alive with CRISPR and so forth. It's possibly much more imminent of a threat than an AI uprising, since as far as I can tell, and I've written a lot about AI, there's not a single computer in the world that has the slightest thing even remotely resembling a thought at the moment. But there are, and will be over the rest of this decade, all kinds of things happening with genetic manipulation. We already do it with lots and lots of life forms, and it'll be done with human beings. So yeah, that actually is a very profound observation you made. And I think you're probably right that is what they're going to explore more and more.
It's not that science fiction authors have not explored this, and it's not that we don't have great stories already about this.
Nancy Kress being an example of somebody who does a lot in that area.
But I thought it was an interesting move for Trek, because while some people may disagree with this, and it is my own take, Trek has a lot of the recent stuff has focused very much on external threat, that it's space was no longer something to go out and explore, and while it could be dangerous, it was wondrous.
Right.
And it was the pairing of the sublime, the both the wonder and the potential horror that was out there, but the wonder and the awe and the inspiration drew us. That was core to Trek. And then it seemed to morph over time, and it's a reflection of the time periods in which we live, that it became a lot more about us and them. And it became a lot more focused on an external enemy. We have identified the enemy. This is now a war. And so many of the Treks, to my mind, began to focus more and more on conflict and not exploration, not what is out there, not the advancement of humanity. And you referred to it earlier on when you talked about, maybe dystopian and pessimism being a drive. And, you know, I think those two different aspects go hand in hand. And with this, with Strange New Worlds, that optimism, but also the shock of encountering things that are different. And it challenges us that we are not always right. And in Children of the Comet, I thought that was so well done that the Enterprise crew dismissed the shepherds. They are religious zealots.
Yeah.
That's how they thought about them. And then at the end, the comet predicted exactly the shape it was going to be, the trajectory it was going to be on after Spock had done that, hours before Spock did it. Were the shepherds right? And it challenges our assumptions. And that's the thing. It asks questions. It doesn't say,
yes,
you must do.
Yes.
This is the thing. It posits questions and goes, we don't know all the answers. We think we do sometimes, but we're going to explore them together. And I think that is one of the essential ingredients that has been missing from a lot of science fiction TV and Star Trek in particular. The questioning, the moral dilemmas that no matter where they occur are always going to be central to the human condition. And the fact when it comes to a conflict between different ways of perceiving that morality, it's not an easy, oh, we're just in the right. That you have to try and think about it. And that to me is just exciting yes. Storytelling.
I agree, absolutely. I have a fondness for mysteries. I've just finished reading yet another of Earl Stanley Gardner's original Perry Mason novels that launched the whole phenomenon that is Perry Mason. And I saw a comment on Goodreads yesterday about Gardner, and it was exactly right. I read them, I enjoy them, and the next day I can't remember anything about them. And there's nothing to discuss, right? You watch a Star Trek, especially the current incarnation on Strange New Worlds, and as soon as it's over, A, you want to watch it again, because now that you've got the framework of what they're talking about, but B, you want to talk to somebody about it. There's a question, there's an idea, there's an ethical debate. You can see it all over it as I'm talking to you now. It's 24 hours since episode 6 dropped, and all over the Facebook groups that I read, people are debating, well, maybe it isn't so bad if one child suffers who is freely chosen that suffering. It's kind of, and they didn't make this parallel, although Captain Pike's first name alludes to it, Christopher. It's kind of like Christ dying for our sins, right? If one guy can take on all of our sins for us, and redeem us, it's very interesting stuff. And there's meat on those bones, which I did not see in a lot of more recent incarnations of Star Trek. And I find it really refreshing to want, to go back to that first horrible season, and forgive me, of the Next Generation. I was 27 when that premiered. And we had a little group of friends who would come over to my place every week when the new episode dropped. And then we would go out as a group to Pizza, a restaurant near us, ostensibly to debate the show, right? And we get there, and there was more debate about what the toppings would be on the pizza than there was about the show, because there was nothing meaty to talk about on that first season of Next Generation. Star Trek is at the best when it's provocative, when it makes you think. And I love that about Strange New Worlds.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think if every single TV show was that, we would want something that was, no, you know what, can I just have something that I can just watch, that is entertainment, that is telling me the answer? We would want that as a relief from constantly being posed questions. But because so much of our entertainment is a soothing pablum smeared over the screen of chewing gum for the eyes with very little narrative content, or the calorific morality and questions that we can really bite into, because so much of it is empty. When we get shows like this that challenge us, that They go, oh, it looks simple enough. Oh, but it's bad what they do to that child. You go, but if it's 100 million people, that's only one person. Well, okay. And well, what if it was 10 people? What if it's 100 people? Where does the line fall?
Yes.
At what point do you go, no, that's too much? Is it if 500 people benefit and only 499 pay? You go, well, the majority's still benefiting.
Right, exactly.
So
Alan Dershowitz, who of course is a professor of law professor at Harvard, has a line that has always resonated with me. I listened to an audio course that he taught many years ago. The measure of a civilization is one number. What number you put in this blank, better X number of guilty people go free than one innocent person go to jail. And he says that in Western civilization, we've sort of settled on a number of about 100, better 100 guilty people go free than one innocent person go to jail. In a totalitarian civilization, it's 0. Every guilty person should go to jail, even if an infinite number. And in a utopian civilization, that number is, the other way around, it's infinite, but an infinite number of guilty people go free. And it's very much this lens of, what level of fractal pulling back you're going to draw your civilization at. And Star Trek is doing an awful lot of that. And it's very interesting to debate those issues. And especially, I got to just one sentence, especially in our polarized world. The United States is unbelievably polarized right now. And you have to be 100% this kind of ideologue or 100% that kind of ideologue. And there's no middle ground. Star Trek has got shades of gray in there for all of the garish colors that you actually see on screen. It's got shades of gray.
And I come from a part of the world quite infamous for having, and we hope that we've moved past it. It's still a work in progress, but I come from a part of the world that is infamous for that polarization, for it was a literally split society. And if sometimes I think people should know more about where I come from, because if you knew what people went through to get to the level of peace that we have now,
yes,
everyone would be doing their best to go, we want to avoid that fate. And one of the things that I've enjoyed about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, even when people who disagree with, say, the politics of an episode, there is actually something there to discuss about it rather than just dismiss.
Right.
And it's the inclusion of the complexity and nuance of ideas. Not, you must do this thing. It is not dictating. So yes, there's a diverse cast, but there's always been diversity in Star Trek. Yeah. It's the future of the human race. It is the future of the Federation. If everyone was all one ethnicity, you would look at that ship and go, there's something wrong about that vision of the future, and I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yes.
So there's a reason for that in the narrative. The idea of having people of different sexualities. It's the future where there are alien races and people falling in love with aliens.
This is nobody had a problem in 1960 with Amanda Grayson having sex with an alien being, Sarek, and yet they freak out when we have on Discovery 2 human beings who happen to be the same gender having sex. I mean, one was, way more out there than the other. And yet it's so telling that, humans mating with aliens and having offspring left, right, and center, no problem. A man kissing a man or a woman kissing a woman, oh my God, what has happened? What has come of us?
The sky is falling in.
The sky is falling in. Yeah, I love the diversity. I love the diversity. And I gotta say, I love the ethnic diversity, the gender and sexual orientation diversity. But I also love that there actually is a diversity of belief. Pike as was established during his tenure on Discovery, was a man who had a religious background. Others have come out flat out and I'm an atheist, and have come out flat out and said they're an atheist. In fact, one of the things that kind of resonated with me with the original Star Trek is Kirk says of Scott in Who Mourns for Adonais, Scotty doesn't believe in gods, right? Scotty has, and that was the first atheist character, the first time an admirable character on television in the 60s have been portrayed as somebody who doesn't have religious belief. And now actually it's kind of ironic that Pike seems to have some sense of religious belief. And other characters, they haven't actually said anybody's an atheist yet on Strange New Worlds, but they clearly have said that that Owo, the person who sits at ops on Discovery, Joanne Owasukin, always have a little bit of difficulty, is an atheist, and that conflict is fascinating too, and I hope we'll see some more of that. And they touched on that. They touched on that with the Children of the Comet episode, which definitely raises that question, right? Of whether or not there is meaning and purpose and destiny, right? That very much dealing with Pike's destiny.
And that's the thing. It's where you had the shepherds reflecting it as this is fate and it being mystical. And Pike's looking at it going, no, but I touched a time crystal that had a quantum effect that allowed me to actually experience what is in my future. An aspect, obviously, you know a lot about having written Flashforward.
Yes, that's right.
But so Pike sees it, I think, very much in terms of the scientific, the rational, the materialist. Whereas, of course, the shepherds are going, no, it's mystical. It's something beyond the ken of all men. And but you're both talking about exactly the same thing. Is it predestined, or do we have free will? And then we get back into that ethical dilemma. We get back into that philosophical conundrum. And then if you think, well, if it's only free will from our perspective, but you can move outside of time and see it from a different perspective,
right?
How does that change the equation? And all of these things are possible in a science fictional universe. And it helps, I think, explore extraordinarily complex ideas by taking them out of a real world context that may have religious or ideological or political positions attached to it. But let's place it in a TV show. Let's place it in a story. And you go, no, without the baggage, without the attachments, without the knee-jerk responses that we would get, let's have a look at the concept and play with the concept and know it a bit better, come to understand it a bit better. And then when we come back to the real, we come back with a little bit more context. We come back with a little bit of insight.
Yes.
And that is one of the powers of narrative. It's one of the beauties of science fiction. And, obviously I'm more fantasy. I see it in fantasy as well, but I know a lot of people can see it explicitly in science fiction. And I think that is a power of what Star Trek Strange New Worlds is trying to explore.
I agree 100%. It's just fascinating to watch. And yet, we've talked some heavy themes here. I want to underscore, if anybody, I can't imagine anybody is watching this who hasn't watched Star Trek Strange. But if you haven't, it's enormously entertaining. The characters are wonderfully appealing. The stories just move. The effects are great. Everything that you want from entertainment is there. Plus this whole additional layer, which you don't have to engage with if you don't want to. But if you want to, it's there. It's just working on all levels. And that's what I really admire here, that they've managed to make a show that can appeal no matter how you want to look at it. Character drama, it's there. Action adventure, it's there. Comedy, it's there. Beautiful, stunning special effects, it's there. Stuff to chew over and debate about. It's all there. It's an incredible package they're pulling together here.
And I think with that accurate summation of what we've been talking about, Rob, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Bring the Gorn back.
The Gorn thanks you too. The Gorn, we were neither merciful nor quick in our discussion here, but me and my buddy here are very happy to have been given this opportunity. And I'll go see my therapist now and get all my mental sorted out. Me and the Garn tell you
So-
all to live long and prosper from Canada, from you there in Ireland. Live long and prosper, everybody.
So everyone's still watching. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I'll see you in the next one.